Hello everyone, I thought I'd take you on a journey with me today prepping a panel for a painting I want to do. This is a 12 by 16 panel by Cheap Joe's. I know they've undergone some changes lately and they may not sell these anymore, but it's just a standard Birch panel. This is 12 by 16. They call it a standard depth, which I want to say looks like 3/4 of an inch roughly, which is pretty standard. And what I do when I prep a panel is, well, first of all, I decide whether or not I'm going to paint the sides. If I don't know, or I want to keep the wood on the sides, I will tape them off. And what I'm using on this particular panel is Meaden's paper safe tape. It is acid free and I really like this tape. I use it to tape off watercolor paper when I'm working on it, and it works really, really well. All I have right now is, this looks like maybe, what is that, maybe half an inch. And so what I did is I just doubled it up, and I like to leave this little edge right here that is where the panel itself is. This is the depth of the panel that's on top of the cradle. I like to leave that, and then that becomes a bit of a painted edge, and then I tape from here back, and that gives like a little bit of an edge from the side. I'm probably going to end up framing this because it's not very deep, so I decided I'll keep the wood. I kind of like that because then it gives the viewer insight into a little bit of the process. They know what sort of surface this is. It's not a canvas, it's a wooden panel. So I thought I'd do that. And then what I do, I typically start on the back, is I will start off this bottle. I reuse the bottle. This is full of something called GAC 100. This is a product made by Golden, and it essentially is acrylic paint without the without the pigment. It's just the binder. So what you get is a clear, a little bit glossy surface. And what I like to do is put a couple of coats of that on the back of the panel. And what that does, because it's clear, you can still see the wood grain, and it helps to prevent warping. Now, this is not a very big panel. It's 12 by 16. This process, I would say, is especially important as your panels get bigger and bigger, because even though they're wood is porous and it will absorb moisture, and it can warp a little bit over time. So I have noticed sometimes with panels that have been sitting around for a while, and then you go to frame them and they're a little bit wonky, and they don't lay flat, and you kind of need to jigger it a little bit in the frame. So this is a great process to do. So I'll put a couple of coats of that on the back. I'm doing this outside today because I really need to get started on this painting. I want to submit it for a show, and the deadline's in a couple of weeks, of course. So I want to go quickly. And while acrylic paint dries very, very quickly, regardless, it dries really fast when you're outside on a summer day. So I've got one coat of that going here, and then what I'll do, I don't bother taping off the back. I don't worry about that, just the sides. And then what I'll do is flip it over, and then I'll use gesso. This is the Liquitex Basics gesso. I really like this gesso. You can get a lot of really cool texture with it. So I like to use this on paintings where I think I might want texture. Otherwise, I really like their regular professional grade gesso. It's very, very smooth. There are tons of brands of gesso out there. Golden makes one. All different brands make them. But I really like this one if I want to have texture. It's thicker. So I'll add a couple of coats of that to the front, and I'll do a vertical coat, and then I'll do a horizontal coat to make sure that I've got everything evenly covered. So that's my process, and then I'll let that dry. Usually touch dry for this is fine. If I was using a different medium other than acrylic, like oil pastel, let's say, I would wait for the gesso to cure, which would mean 24 to 48 hours. But because I'm using acrylic on top of it, I'm not going to worry too much about that. As long as it's touch dry, I'll be fine, and we'll go from there. So that's the process. I'll give you a little bit of shots here so you can kind of see what it looks like in action. A couple of other things I'll mention about the process. So I've just squirted some of that GAC 100. It looks white, but it dries clear. I will make sure that I'm changing the orientation of my surface so that my brush strokes aren't always going in the same direction. I'm going to go horizontal with this one. The other thing I will say is make sure you've got some water. You do not want this to dry on your brush. It's essentially glue and it will ruin your brushes. So you definitely want to make sure you've got some water there. And then I just wipe that off on a paper towel. You don't want it to be super, super drippy or it will thin out the polymer. So then I'll just go in here, and my first layer was vertical, so I'm going to go in horizontal, and that makes sure that I close all the gaps. Look at how quickly it's drying. You can kind of see it's already building up some texture on the surface there. I'm talking too much and not moving quickly enough. It's really warm out here today. And the idea is you don't want to go super, super thick with your layers. Otherwise, you'll build up texture, which is fine if that's what you want. But I would rather do more layers and have them be thinner than have a bunch of thicker layers that I'm going to have to wait to dry. And again, we don't need to be perfect here. Really what we want to do is just ensure that the surface is coated and protected from moisture. So this is going to do that. Now, I could use a varnish for this. I don't, because varnish tends to be a little bit more expensive. So economically, it's better. It's hard for me to paint and talk at the same time. I just prefer to use this, and I usually buy this in big bundle, big sizes, and then decant them into smaller jars just for budget reasons. But I use it for lots of things. So you can make your own paint with it. You can crush pastels. You can use a watercolor and mix this with watercolor, and it will. You can make acrylic paint from your watercolor pigments. So it's super, super useful and versatile, and I usually buy it in big sizes for that reason, but I'll leave this to dry. So just wanted to point that out to you. Make sure you're rotating your surface so you're getting things in different angles, and you can use other things for this process. Find what works for you. You could use acrylic paint for this if you wanted to. It will soak into the surface, so you may need to use a couple of layers, or you could use gesso for it. The idea is we want to seal the surface so that it doesn't allow moisture in. And the GAC 100 is clear, so I find it gives me a nice professional looking surface on the back because you don't really notice it and you see the pretty wood. So there we go. Okay, thanks. Alrighty, so I've been letting that second coat dry. It's a little bit sticky. I don't know if you can hear that, but it will be in general. It'll harden up more as it cures. But you can see, I don't know if you can see over here, see where it's a little bit thicker right there? You can see the texture. So that's why I prefer to do thinner layers versus thicker ones. Unless you want that texture, then that's a really cool thing to do. So once it's dry to the touch, I would consider this dry to the touch, none of it's coming up, then I'll go ahead and turn it over and work on the other side. I don't know if this is like for real chemistry or not, but in my brain I tell myself that I want it to be at least touch dry before I start the other side, so I'm not trapping moisture inside the wood. The GAC 100 is water-based, and gesso, this acrylic gesso, is water-based, so there's water in there. I want the water to evaporate outward. I don't want it to get trapped inside the wood. So in an ideal world, I probably should let the GAC 100 dry like 24 hours to really cure and let all that water evaporate. but I'm going to split the difference and just wait till it's touch dry, turn it over, and then gesso the other side. So what I like to do with this gesso, it's really thick. I don't know if you can hear it gloppy inside. I like to give it a good shake, and then I'll go ahead and put it on. I'll do one thin layer horizontally, one thin layer vertically, check it, and usually that's about all I'll do. I did go wash my brush and clean the water so that I don't have any of that polymer in there, the GAC 100, just so I'm making sure I'm getting good tooth with the gesso. So I'll go ahead and open this. Oops. That's the second time that happened to me today. The GAC 100 blooped all over me too. Good thing I have tape on the sides. This is why we tape. So I'll let you see. You can see how thick it is. It takes a while to get it to the top. This is wonderful for creating textures. So when I'm working on a surface and I want to create lots of texture, what I will do is put it on thick, and I'll draw into it with different mark making tools. Sometimes use like texture plates or stencils. I'm wiping off my brush to get most of the water off. And then like I can do something like this, and most of that will stay. As the water evaporates, it will, of course, come down a little bit, but it is really, really great for that. And, you know, if you want a really smooth surface, you can sand this. You know, I don't got time for that, so I'm not going to worry about it. And smooth is not what I'm going for. If I were going for a really smooth surface, I would frankly use a different kind of gesso. But this gesso is more affordable. I don't know the exact formulations, but my guess would be it's got more, perhaps marble dust or whatever they put inside to give it the tooth to make it kind of gritty. Often that can be marble dust or calcium carbonate, or I think that's the same thing. So yeah, and then I just kind of go here. I'll make sure I'm getting it spread as well as I can. I know I'm doing another coat on top, so I'm not going to worry if it's like perfect. I do want to make sure, well, I never really worry if it's perfect anyway, but I do want to make sure that I'm covering everything with each layer. And again, this is why I don't want a lot of water on my brush, because I don't want to thin out the gesso. So I can tell I'm going to need a little bit more on this side. It does have a tendency to kind of pool in the middle. And I am hand holding the camera today, obviously. I didn't bring my my camera mount outside, so bear with me if it's a little bouncy. Yep, I'm gonna need more than that. This stuff is pretty thick. This is why it's great, you know, when places have sales, whether it's online or at your local retailer, it's great to try different products. You know, sometimes you can get like the 4-ounce size or the 8-ounce size a lot less expensively, and then try them out. You know, if you say, oh, I've got gesso, I don't need more gesso, then you're losing out on the opportunity to see what different textures look like. Not all gessos are created equal. The formulations are different. And find the ones that work for you. As you experiment, you'll see, oh, I like this for this, I like that for that. And then you'll have what works for your process and the effect that you're going for. I do like this brush. It's a fairly soft synthetic brush. I typically only use synthetics. for many different reasons, cost being one of them, but also whenever possible, I try not to use animal products. So this is very soft, and it makes it easy to spread what I'm looking for. And it's a really good size. I want to say this looks like about maybe 2 inches. And I paint with this as well, but it's makes quick work. Sometimes I will also use like a catalyst wedge or something flat to, if I really want it to be more even and I don't want brush strokes, let's say. But because I don't mind the texture, I'll use the brush, and then if I get brush strokes, that's bonus. And if I were intentionally trying to create extra texture, I would be pushing hard and making big ridges and stuff like that. So that's not so much the goal for today. It's really a little bit of texture is good, but I don't necessarily want tons and tons of texture. I do know what I'm going to paint on this. So I did, for those of you that have been following me, you'll know at the beginning of June, I wrapped up my 100-day project, and I did 100 days of figures. And a lot of those were faces, and some of them were full figures. And I explored 10 different mediums over that 100 days. So I did 10 days of a medium, and then I switched. And and I did them all. They were all 5x7, and I really loved how some of them came out. And what I thought I would do is, for some of the ones that I really wanted to explore in a larger size, that I would use those as inspiration, not trying to replicate necessarily, because that's not very interesting to me, but to go in and say, oh, I really like this piece, let me do it on a larger size and see what that ends up looking like. And so I'm using one of those 5x7s as inspiration, one of the ones I did in acrylic. And so I know I'm going to end up painting faces on this. So I don't mind some texture, but I don't want huge amounts of texture. Usually I go for the big texture when I don't know what I'm painting, because that kind of gives me a fun jumping off place, because I can just react to whatever that texture is. So you can see perhaps a little bit some of the brush strokes and stuff in there. I'm not sure if you can see any of that, but so I'll let this dry, and some of it right here I can already tell is dry because it's so warm out here, but I'll let this dry, and then I'll turn the surface around. So as I'm making brush strokes, again, I'm not doing them all in the same direction. And I'll put another coat on here just to make sure I've got it all covered. And then once that's dry, I'll be good to paint. Okay, this is pretty much dry to the touch. There were a few places, gosh, you can hardly see it on this white background, huh? There were a few places where, like right here, where I could feel it was still a little bit cool and a little bit wet, where my brush might have been a little bit thicker. And so I'm going to put another coat on here in a second. I just wanted to show you some of that texture that stays. So I could leave this at one coat if I wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and put a second one on just because I know that I'm going to be using some texture paste on here. And texture paste, the kind that I'm going to be using, isn't heavy per se, but the reason why I'm using a wood panel as opposed to a canvas for this painting is because I know I'm going to have some weight on it. And when I do that or use heavy textures, I really like to use a panel so I have a nice solid surface for things to sit on. So because of that, I want to make sure I've got like a good juicy layer of tooth underneath so that everything I put on top has something really good to hold on to. So I want to build a really good foundation. Now, what would have happened if I had started to apply this layer without it being dry first, or if my brush was too wet? What would happen is it would reactivate the gesso and it would start to pull it up. So I'd end up going back down to the wood and making a bunch of texture because it wasn't dry. So I'm kind of walking the line right now on where it stands. It is, I can tell it's not 100% dry in the deeper layers. It's dry on top, nothing's coming up, but I'm kind of walking that line. So, well, let's see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and get some more of this gesso on here. And because I know it's not like 100% dry, I'm going to make sure I'm not agitating the surface. Oops, you can't see that. Too much. So I'm going to put some decent sized globs on there. And I'm going to get my brush fairly dry. Again, if it's wet, too wet, it's just going to activate all of that gesso that's underneath. So let me get that fairly dry. And then I'm just going to walk around here. That might be a better angle. You can probably see a little bit better. Sometimes, especially with the Liquitex Basics, you'll get these like little chunky bits. Sometimes I leave those in if I want. They can make like extra little bits of texture, but if I don't, then I will pluck them out. And you can already hear the grittiness of the layer that's underneath. So that's a good sign that that is dry. And again, sometimes I'll use a silicone brush for this if I want it to be a little bit smoother and I don't want these brush marks. But for this project, I kind of am interested in some of that texture. So let me set that down. I can tell I need a little bit more up here in this corner. I'm getting gesso all over my outdoor table. This is a glass table, so it'll come right off. Once it's dry, I can just fleck it off. So it's kind of fun to shake it up every once in a while. I like to come outside now that the weather's nice and do stuff out here. Shake up my process a little bit, be inspired by nature, listen to the birds. We're almost done here. I've got a particularly stubborn spot like this one where the wood might be a little bit lower. I'll pull some gesso from a different part. I've got a few spots here you can see where it's kind of dried and I don't have the gesso fully covered, so I'll add just a little bit more in those spots and then we'll be done. It's getting a little bit warm out here, so I might bring this inside and let it finish drying, and in an hour or two I can start painting. For this particular piece, I'll probably start with a just toning the surface. I might use, I've been thinking about what color I want to use. Maybe like a nice, vibrant yellow for this one might be kind of interesting. Or an orange. I'm going to have some flower people on here. I've been into these flower people lately. And It's always fun, especially if there's greenery. I always like to have maybe some yellow, a warm color showing through to be a contrast with those greens. And the flower people themselves, I don't know what color they'll probably be. Maybe some pinks and purples. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what they say when I get them in there. Whatever calls to me. Alrighty. So now I've got a good surface. It's not like super 100% even. I've got some good texture, but everything is covered. Pop that brush into that water and let this dry. I don't know if you can see some of that neat texture. So all the texture that you can see on the surface right now will stay. So it's got a little bit of texture, a little bit of brush marks, but nothing that's like gonna obstruct detail from a face, for example. Alrighty, there we go. Thanks for joining me. I will see you in the next one. Stay tuned to see how this one evolves.